Welcome to Transcendent. I'm Raya, and I'm the daughter.
And I'm Joe, and I'm the dad.
We are here with John Paulk, who I first encountered way back when I was in ministry with a conservative church. My pastor at that time said, we need somebody on staff that understands issues that are affecting the culture right now, and homosexuality is becoming a really big thing. I want you to be the guy that has this figured out. So I went with my now ex-wife, and we went to a conference called Love One Out. We were hearing from a number of different ex-gays, but especially John was one of the main speakers there. And I remember being there in person, hearing John's story and thinking, wow, this is so amazing what God can do. And then, of course, a few years later, it came out that John had been spotted in a gay bar. And then a few years later, then shortly before my own transition, John and many of the leaders of the group at the time had come forward and said, we got it wrong. We hurt a lot of people. And I remember when I heard that story, I fell down weeping and realized if they got it wrong, maybe I got it wrong too. And that's where I first started to change. So, John, thank you for being here. Would you tell us a little bit about your story?
Oh, I sure would. I thank you both for inviting me. It's an honor and a true pleasure to talk to you both in your audience. So, conversion therapy for me began when I was 24 years old. I was an out gay man, young gay man, for about 6 years at that time. And I encountered a pastor on the campus where I was going to college. And after a good amount of time, he led me to Christ and I became a Christian. At that point, he began discipling me, reading the Bible, etc., etc. And he's the one that showed me the light, so to speak, that I wanted to know if I died as a gay man, would I go to heaven? That was very important to me. He said, you will, but God would not be pleased with your life. So imagine being 24 years old, and I did not grow up in a religious or Christian home. This is my first exposure to it. I wanted God to be happy with my life. Through the course of time, he found an organization called Exodus, based out of Northern California. I left Ohio, I joined Exodus, and I started meeting and learning from other people that homosexuality was nothing that I was born with, that it was environmental creation, it had environmental origins, and that given enough motivation and determination, that one could overcome homosexuality.
How did you feel about that in that moment?
You mean when he told me that God would not be pleased with my life?
Yes.
Yeah.
That must have been very difficult to hear.
It was terrifying. It was terrifying to hear that. But by this point, I had fallen in love with the Lord and Christ, and he became like my father. And it was like I had suitcases that I had been carrying around all my life that were too heavy for me. And he helped me drop them. And he carried me. I had a very difficult childhood, very prototypical gay boy, picked on, name called, beat up. I was raised by a narcissistic mother. By the time I was 18, my parents had each been through 3 marriages and divorced. So God, being ever present and ever with me, was very, very important to me.
Yeah.
And the most important scripture to me was, I will never leave you, nor will I forsake you. So I wanted to live my life to please God.
I remember in that very first seminar that I went to for the Love One Out to really look deeply at somebody's background, because at that time the thought was there's probably something in the background, something with parents that made them that way.
The theory was that because it was environmental, that it could be changed. So I went through a year-long program at Exodus, and we were taken through courses throughout the year to discover what the origins of our homosexuality were. And they were very stereotypical of what years ago we used to think, that the male child, for example, had an overbearing mother, very dominant, and a very absent and passive father. And the boy grew up relating more to the female than to the male. And his identity was not solid as a male. So when he started to go through puberty, instead of being attracted to the opposite gender, who he should have been different from, he actually felt different from his own gender, and that became the object of his sexual desire. In a nutshell, it happens similarly with a woman, except in reverse. There also can be a bit of sexual molestation that goes on in both men and women when they were growing up. Evidence shows that a larger percentage of little girls who go on to become lesbian have been molested or violated in some fashion. So we believed getting at those root causes of that and undoing all of that, your homosexual desires would decrease. So I bought that lock, stock, and barrel. I wholeheartedly believed it with everything in my being. And I began rising up in the ranks of the ex-gay movement. That's what you were called, an ex-gay. And that identity was comfortable. I didn't feel straight. I wasn't straight. I couldn't call myself straight, but I didn't feel like I could call myself gay either. I was stuck in this middle part called ex-gay. So I started rising in the ranks of the organization. 4 years into that, I was in leadership because I had done well. I had not had sex with a man, which was highly praised if you could remain celibate. Because if you didn't and you actually had sex with a man, you could be dismissed from this program. So you move all the way out to California, you have sex with a man, maybe you do it a couple times, you're dismissed. So you either go back where you came from, and some people came from around the world to go to this program that was very well known. But because I did not, and I remained celibate, I stayed in the good graces. I have a leadership personality to begin with. I rose in the levels of leadership. After 4 years, I actually fell in love with one of the women who was at Exodus. She was a lesbian going through the program to become a straight woman. Well, lo and behold, we became good friends, fell in love, and we ended up getting married.
Mm-hmm. Had you dreamed about the idea of getting married, having a straight relationship before that, having a family? Was that something that was on your radar, either growing up or going through the program?
A really important concept for me was the word normal. And I grew up in such a chaotic household. I was a freak of nature to friends. Growing up in school, I fit in nowhere. Maybe with the girls, I would be friends with girls. I never fit in with the boys, and because my parents were divorced, while my father loved me, and I believe he did the best he could, he and I did not connect emotionally or otherwise. And I always wanted his approval. So I was on a quest to be normal. And if I was normal, then I would be okay. And to me, normal meant that I would find a wife and get married a heterosexual life. And to me, that was normal. And that was my quest, to be normal. That drive was so strong in me. I probably never should have gotten married, but I did love the woman who became my wife. I loved her dearly and deeply. We ended up staying married for 21 years and had 3 sons, which of course are all grown now. I ended up working at Focus on the Family, one of the largest Christian ministries actually in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I started speaking all over the United States, doing lots of media speaking engagements. So I had got to the point where I was the head of the homosexuality and gender division for Focus on the Family and became one of a small handful of spokesmen for Focus on the Family. Quite daunting, I might admit. To be given that was a responsibility that was too much for me to bear.
Mm.
And like you said, Raya, you heard me speak. I actually led that conference, and it went on for 10 years, and it went around the United States and the world. It was the longest running ministry that Focus on the Family ever had. I would tell this wonderful story about growing up gay, meeting my wife. And I'll tell you, when you get married and have children, I was normal. I reached my goal. I was normal. We lived in a suburb with children, a normal American suburb. Our kids played with the kids down the street. We knew the parents down the street. That was as normal as apple pie to me. So I really reached my goal. But what was happening inside is the desires for men romantically and emotionally never, and I mean never, changed. They didn't lessen, and as time went by, 2 decades, they got stronger, actually. They didn't lessen, they got stronger, the desire. I finally came to an epic place in my life, an apex, as you will, where I had this conversation with God. I said to him, really, nothing about me has changed except my behavior. I had remained celibate from having sex with men for 25 years at this point. While I loved my wife, I loved my son, I had a house full of people who loved me, I felt alone and lonely.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's funny, a lot of people have called me the big liar. And when I would get up and speak to audience and talk about changing my sexual orientation, we were on Oprah Winfrey. And I remember her asking me point blank, do you still have sexual desires toward men? I said, no, I don't. And the audience laughed.
Mm-hmm.
They laughed when I said that because it wasn't true. And they could sense that. I realized that if I told the truth, that yes, I still have the desires, I would ruin my testimony and I would let the thousands of people down that I had been in contact with, that had heard me on the radios. Ann and I had written 2 books by then. We had spoken to thousands and thousands and thousands of people. We were probably on every Christian show there was. We were in People magazine. We were on the cover of Newsweek. I was in GQ even. So I had a lot riding on my shoulders. And I was fearful of being honest. But really, I was lying to myself. You know, I had built this up that if you say you're not gay, then you're not.
Mm-hmm.
It's like mind over matter. No, I'm not gay. No, I haven't had sex with a man for 25 years. I'm not gay. I live a straight life. I could say that I was straight by this point, but it was still in the background, gnawing. I would look at gay pornography. I would go into stores and look at cards that were erotic, that had pictures of half-clothed men. And even though I didn't have sexual acting out, I acted out with gay pornography.
Mm-hmm.
I had to be honest with myself. It took me until I was 48 years old to be able to finally be honest with myself. So 25 years, I lived a lie.
Mm-hmm.
But if you'd asked me during those years, are you lying? I would say, no, of course I'm not lying. Because I had built up this, really, let's call it what it is, a cult mentality.
Mm-hmm.
I look at the ex-gay movement today as a cult. It has cult overtones. If you didn't behave, you were gone, you were kicked out, you were dismissed. And if you didn't toe the line, there really was no place for me to go. I remember you had started the show by talking about in the year 2000, I walked into a gay bar in Washington, D.C. I had been drinking alcohol. So all my defenses were down. And a gay activist caught me in there, and it became enormous news, went around the world. I was horribly ashamed. I initially lied about it. Now, by this time, I was the chairman of the board of Exodus, and I was a leader on this topic at the largest Christian ministry in the United States. I was terrified. I remember as part of my healing, they required me to see a Christian therapist who, oddly enough, was paid for by Focus on the Family, and he was on staff there. And I remember one day going into his office shortly after this incident occurred, and I said, I'll be honest with you, what I would rather do is be with a man. But I said it very explicitly. I just let it out, and I was honest. His response to me was, you know, we're not going to talk about that. That's unseemly. We're just not going to talk about that. And what he really did was he just shoved me back into the closet. Instead of coming out, exploring it, what does this feel like? He shoved it back down. And what I realized was I couldn't be honest. I couldn't tell people how I was really feeling. And so I was doomed. I was doomed until many years went by. At the age of 48, I had come home from work, and I had this conversation with God, who I was close to. He was very much alive and a part of my life. I very strongly believed that he would never leave me. That was the good part of theology that I did take with me. And I said, Lord, I am miserable. I am so unhappy if I don't embrace who I truly am and live an authentic life, because my life was so filled with lies by this point. I'm going to take my life. So that began the process of telling my wife, and we had been separated a couple times during this period, which was kept completely secret.
Was that always based on orientation?
It was all based on homosexuality, me struggling with pornography and things like that. I had to take a lie detector test given to me by a police officer to determine that I had actually not had sex with a man. I had 2 of those to prove to my wife that I had not done that. that's going to great lengths to make sure someone is being honest with you. But I kind of forced her hand. I was terrified to be honest. So at this point, I was going to be honest or I was going to commit suicide. My wife decided, I wasn't even thinking about divorce at that time, but she decided that she would divorce me, and it was excruciatingly painful. Excruciatingly. I thought, here I'm going to tear my family apart. What are going to happen to my sons? It was very, very difficult. Around this time, around the age of 40, 45, there were other ex-gay leaders around the nation who were doing the same thing. It was uncanny. My peers, other leaders were all coming out and embracing. I don't know if it was the age range that we were in, but leaders on an equal level with me were coming out and embracing who they were. And so I had a support group there. People rallied around me because they knew I was going to have a very tough road ahead of me. But they helped me. I issued a press release that went around the world. I revoked my beliefs in conversion therapy. I had come to realize that instead of helping people, they damaged people. They damaged people, sometimes where all the therapy in the world could not undo the damage of the cult, of the brainwashing they had gone through, that if they were gay, they were doomed to hell, they were unacceptable, they weren't loved by God. Many of my friends who had embraced themselves as gay developed mental illnesses. Now, this is after they came out. Developed mental illnesses, are on medication, probably for the rest of their life, for depression, for anxiety. They spent their whole life living a lie. And we realized the damage that was caused by the church and by ex-gay leaders such as myself and our movement really caused tremendous guilt and shame in people. And shame that goes deeper than any shame can go. We were taught by the church the worst thing you could be was a homosexual. That was the worst. Well, the Bible didn't say it was the worst.
Right.
It certainly did not say that, but God's people did. And if you were raised in the church and you had parents who loved you dearly, they believed that. And so to them, being gay was the worst thing you could be. For me, as time went by, I had a couple of very good therapists that took me through the process of really deprogramming me, and they used the same techniques as they would bringing someone out of a cult.
Mm-hmm.
And so my thinking could get cleared up.
What is that process like? What kinds of things would they do in order to help you deconstruct? That's, of course, the word that we use right now. Oftentimes people coming out and dealing with things, we'll talk about that they're deconstructing. I'm sure you had a different language or a different way of thinking about it, but
deconstructing was the word that was used because this has only been 12 years. So 12 years sounds like a long time, but it's not. Mm-hmm. And I'm still working through that process. Not every day, but there are things that will go through my mind that I had been taught during those years.
When you first admitted this and first realized that you just couldn't do this anymore, did you have a sense of freedom, relief, anything like that? Was it something that opened the door for you? so to speak?
No, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel free. I felt terrible
Mm.
because I had been this figurehead for 20, it was actually mostly for about 10 to 15 years. I was in the spotlight more than anybody else. I was the poster child of this movement. And it was so overwhelming, the thought that I had done this and participated in this out of what my truth was during those years. It was almost unbearable. I was terrified because the gay community, and rightly so, started to come after me and issue all kinds of threats. So I had no home. I had no Christian family. Christians, when I started coming out, the things that people had been friends of mine for decades were so ugly to me, so horrible and rejecting of me publicly. And then I had the gay community feel the same way. It was a very, very difficult, the first 3 years were the hardest. Now you might be, this is a process someone goes through. You don't wake up, oh good, I'm gay again. No, you were nothing at that point. I was nothing. I couldn't say I was gay. It took me years to even say I was gay. But I wasn't ex-gay. I was nothing. I had no sexuality. What I had was good therapists. And these therapists were non-Christians. And they allowed me to talk and tell my truth. They allowed me that room. They taught me that I was brainwashed. They taught me I had been emotionally abused by my wife for 20 years. It took years, literally about 7 years, to rebuild me as a person. What I started to do was help other men just like me. A group of us founded a Facebook page called Formerly Married Gay Dads. Now I think there are thousands of people a part of this. There were about 20 when we first started. So I had people to talk to who were going through the same thing. And we built each other up. We told each other the truth when we had carried lies about homosexuality and things of that nature. And we just grouped together. Who do you go to talk about this? You know, it certainly wasn't the church. I even tried to go to gay affirming churches. I couldn't go there either. Mm. I didn't believe their theology either. I believed no one's theology.
So you knew that what you had been believing was not sustainable, but you didn't know at that point what to replace it with.
That's correct. And everybody's different. Most of my friends, I would say, have abandoned their Christian faith altogether. But in my case, because I did not grow up in a Christian environment, I didn't have that baggage from my parents. I didn't go to church every Sunday. I never went to Sunday school. I never read the Bible. I didn't have that kind of baggage that I had to overcome as a child. I knew God as an adult. I came to know him at the age of 24. So I was able to separate God from God's people. And God was not like God's people. God loved me, embraced me, accepted me, would never leave me. And it is he who I could trust. Mm-hmm. And he got me through this. literally, the Lord kept hold of my hand and pulled me through. Now, I had an encounter one night in a bar, a gay bar. A man came up. This is when I was just coming out publicly. I ended up on the cover of a gay newspaper that was on the stand for a whole month. So my face was everywhere in Portland.
And was this consensually, or this was?
Oh, no,
No.
not consensual at all. I was trying to come out little by little by little. And a man came up to me in a gay bar and he pointed a finger at me, got right in my face, backed me up against the wall, and he said, his voice was shaking, "We just want you to know, we know who you are and we're after you."
Wow.
We are after you. And he said, "My parents put me through this." He was a Jewish man, but there was a Jewish wing of the ex-gay movement. And he goes, "It took me years to accept who I was." And he said, "You have a lot to apologize for." That, if you can believe this, that was the first time I had heard that I had hurt people. I really had no idea that all these years I was helping one section of people, but hurting another, hurting the group of people that I was now like. And something came over me that night. And I looked him in the eyes and tears started to run down my face. And I put my hand gently on his shoulder. And I said, "I am so sorry for what anything I have done or was a part of that caused you this pain in your life. Would you forgive me?" Now, this was not the response this man was expecting from me. He was expecting defensiveness, and instead of defending myself, I heard what he said. So tears started to run down his face. And he and I became very dear friends. As a matter of fact, he became a champion of mine. He was up in gay politics. He was up in the gay community in leadership. And he protected me and he walked me through what to do to make amends. That man is dear to me to this day. And that's when I really realized me, not single-handedly, but the movement I led and the other people had hurt gay people. So I spent the next 10 years and still to this day doing anything I could to help, to turn the tide back, to minister to people, to love and accept themselves for who they are. And that, really is the quest of my life at this point. See, even all these years, it's very emotional to talk about.
John, thank you so much for joining us. We really are grateful for your time. We're grateful that you're speaking out and that you are using your past experience as a platform for bringing healing. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
And for those of you out here who have been listening to this, we encourage you to share it with others. We are honored to have had John Paulk here, and we are just so grateful for the message that he has delivered here. And if you like what you've heard, come back again next week. We'll see you Monday.